Hey there, Brady. Just got a lot of notes to do, so this may leak over into a second video. The videos can only be 15 minutes long, so if that happens, I'll post the first one, and then you can get started if you want to, and then I'll make the second one. But I just want to make sure I see you got your Revolutionary War battle chart in. That's good. I want to make sure that you got everything right on it. So if you want to take it back after these notes, fix it, and hand it right back in, go ahead and do it. Just remind me that I said you could do it. If you're happy with it as it is, that's cool too. And then obviously you talked about your review sheet. There's actually two places to hand in your review sheet. The last page goes in a separate assignment, and the other three pages go on the original assignment. So you'll find them both under the Chapter 6 tab in my classroom. Actually, let me show you that real quick. So the first three pages of your notes are right here. And let's see if you turned that in. Oh, you did turn that in, good. And then just the last page goes in the separate assignment, and it sounds like you probably know that already because you asked about it, and that's why I'm making this video. So your last page goes here. Take a picture of it and hand it in there. Let's get right to those notes. All right. And you said this is where you left off, so sorry if you've already got part of this. This whole section 3 is about the war expanding. It's not just going to be in that little area around Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and New York. It's going to get big, and there's going to be a lot more people involved in it. By the time this war ends, it's going to be pretty massive. Almost all American types of Americans, African Americans, women, Native Americans, white dudes are going to be involved. So let's talk about some of the problems that George Washington's going to have is just keeping an army together. And in this picture, they're wearing their full uniforms. That's not going to happen until the last 2 years of the war. Get out of there. But the problem with keeping the army together is men only sign up for 1 year. In the Vietnam War, Americans were drafted, but only for 2 years. If you sign up for the military now, you're probably going to serve a 3-year term. But we were dedicated to the concept of freedom. We were dedicated to the concept of living your own life. So it would be hypocritical to say, you get to do whatever you want, but if you join the army, you're in it for life, or you're in it till the war is over. So we only asked for a 1-year service, and then after a year they would leave. Especially that first year of the war, if you think about it, they were in terrible shape. All they were doing was losing. They were freezing their butts off in the winter. There was no supplies. They didn't even have uniforms. So after that first year, his army disappeared, and a lot of those men went home and farmed for a year and got their family set up again, or got their shop back in shape, and then came back for the third year. So they serve for a year, take a year off, serve for a year, take a year off, because they did believe in the cause, but it was almost impossible because they weren't even really getting paid in the military. So it was almost possible to keep their family alive and serve in the military. So a lot of them did the every other year thing, and Washington didn't even have a big army, but it would disappear, right around winter every year. In addition to the hardships of the army, the civilians themselves faced huge shortages because the British Army and the American Army were both buying up all of the goods, which left not a lot of goods for them to use. If they were known to live in a patriot village or town, the British might stop by and take all their extra stuff because they didn't want it going to the patriot cause. So they would leave them just enough stuff to get through the winter because the British were civilized, but they would take everything else. They might get attacked. There's towns that got burned down because the British would show up and say, look, you got to stop supporting the Patriots, or there's going to be consequences. And they'd find out they're still harboring spies or helping the Patriots, or whatever, and they might burn down portions of the town. So the civilians did not get to take the war off. They were highly affected by it as well. A lot of women, and this is definitely a review sheet question, had to step up. They started doing these shopkeeping jobs. They started running farms. And remember, this is a time period where women didn't do men's jobs. In today's world, women can do just about any job that men do. I mean, we don't let them serve in combat roles in the military, but even then, they still kind of do that. So women at the time were not trained farmers. They were not trained. Most of them couldn't do math, so they couldn't be shopkeepers. But when the men disappeared, they had to. they learned how to be farmers. And by the way, don't forget, they're still raising the family. So this is the first taste of what we call the modern woman that's expected to like have a job and raise the family, etc. They were doing all that, and being a housewife was incredibly laborious work back then. It could take 5, 6 hours to prepare a meal. There was no fridges, there was no ovens. You had to shop every day or nearly every day for food if you lived in town. You had to figure it out if you were on the farm, and it was a really hard job. And then take care of the kids. And now they're doing all the jobs the men did. Some of them went to the camps, cared for the wounded, especially if they were a young couple with no kids. The wife might accompany. If there were kids, they had to stay home and take care of them. But young married women with no kids would come. They'd help for the wounded. They'd clean the camp. They'd do some cooking. They'd try to do their best to take care of the men in the camp. So they did absolutely step up during the war. Um, in order to pay for the war, the Congress invented money. It's going to be worth practically nothing. The money that they're going to print, and you can see some examples of it here. I mean, you can even see how poorly it's cut out and stuff. It's really just, it's not fake money because they would honor it, but they didn't have any power to tax. So Congress couldn't raise money. They had no way to force a person to give them money. That's what taxes are. The government forces you to give them your money. Well, one of the big reasons we left England is because the taxes were too high and we had no choice on it. And if we're dedicated to the concept that the government can't tell you what to do unless you give them permission to, then we can't tax them. So after the war, we're going to create a Congress, and the Congress is going to get elected by the people, and then those people are going to tax them. And that's legit. But we haven't done all that yet. So during the war, it would be hypocritical to tax them. So how do we pay for our soldiers? We just print money. It's called Continentals. And if you understood economics a little bit better at your age, you'll take it when you're in 11th grade. But this is disastrous. If you just start printing money and just giving it away, it's useless. It's got to be backed up by something, or it has to be desirable. And by the end of the war, they had printed so much that the money was legitimately useful or useless. So the money they were paying the soldiers, the ways they were attempting to buy guns and ammos for their soldiers was just useless. By the end of the war, we're going to get help from the French and the Spanish and the Dutch, and they're going to give us actual like gold, and they're going to use French money that everybody will take. So during the war, it was really hard to get supplies because if let's say you made guns, you were a gunsmith, and you could either sell your guns to the Americans and get Continentals that were useless, or you could sell the guns to the British and get British notes or pounds or gold that was useless anywhere. It wasn't even a tough choice. So the British could get anything they wanted, and if you remember, that was one of their advantages. Was the profiteers, and the Continentals couldn't. So for the first 2 to 3 years of the war, until the French join us, our money's useless. All right. So most of the fighting, come on. Oh yeah, computer's acting weird, pardon me. Most of the fighting in the 13 colonies is going to take place along the coast. And as you can see, all the battles over here. However, we are going to go out and we are going to attack some of the British forts out west. And that's because we're trying to pull some of the British troops out there. With a very small amount of troops, we can cause enough havoc that the British are going to start having to dedicate their resources to saving these forts. The British can't afford to lose a single fort because it's super embarrassing. That's one of the big things we're going to play on during the war is British pride. The king would be irate if we were taking forts because we are just backwoods, redneck colonials. That's what the whole world believes. So they have to defend every inch of their land. So we're going to send a guy out there and we're going to attack a bunch of their forts. In order to do that, though, we got to try and keep the Native Americans out of the fight because the Native Americans, while they certainly don't love the British, really hate the Americans. So we're going to try and get them to stay out of it, and we're going to do that by bribing them. We're going to give them money. Unfortunately, that money is Continentals, useless. They're not going to do it. So we know they're not going to ally with us. All we've done is slaughter them. After Pontiac's rebellion, we've been burning down entire villages. They are not going to cooperate with us. We were hoping to offer them something to stay out of it. We don't have anything they want. So they end up fighting for the British. Come on, computer. Come on. There we go. So most of them end up fighting for the British. Most of them end up fighting for the British out west, though. They're not going to come east and fight. And remember, most of the Native American groups don't live here anymore because we slaughtered them and kicked them out. So that's only going to take place in the West, where we have to worry about Native Americans. But even with that, the Native Americans don't really fight in the war much, but the war is incredibly, incredibly devastating to them anyway. A lot of tribes broke up over the decision to join the war or not. Native American groups largely function with what's called consensus, which means unless everybody in the tribe agrees, we're not going to do it. You know, it has to be, it's not a majority rules, it's 100% rules. And a lot of tribes couldn't make a decision on whether to help the British or stay out of the war. Remember, help the Americans is not in that equation. The option is stay out of it or help the British. And the argument for helping the British is very simple. We can choose them and be rewarded by the British, or we could stay out of it and perhaps the Americans win, and that is the worst case scenario. At least we can pick the devil we know. We can pick the side that's least dangerous to us, because at least the British tried to protect them with the Proclamation of 1763, tried to keep the Americans out of the Ohio Valley. Okay, but most Native Americans said, why would we fight for any white man to kill another white man so that they can all eventually come kill us? They felt like helping either side was just bringing about their own doom. So since they couldn't agree on things, a lot of tribes broke up. They fought against themselves, not physically fighting, but they broke up. They couldn't agree on anything. Those that did join very quickly came across a new version of smallpox. Smallpox is what caused the Great Dying, which is about 90% of Native Americans died within the first 50 years after Columbus hit our shores. And those that survived were immune to that version of smallpox, but were incredibly weakened. And it took 150 years for their populations to come back. Well, we're going to come back in contact with a new smallpox that's going to hurt both the Native Americans and the soldiers, but it's going to hurt the Native Americans most. And so this is a new version of the smallpox, and it's going to sweep through and it's going to kill thousands and thousands of Native Americans. So their involvement in the war is relatively limited, but they're still absolutely decimated. And as we know, the Americans are going to win the war, and in the next 50 years after that, they're going to sweep into the area and they're going to start slaughtering and kicking out all the Native Americans again. So not a great history for the Native Americans. All right, the guy out west that's fighting is a guy named George Rogers Clark. He's an American general, and he's given a very, very small group of 170 men. Tiny, but he goes out and he starts attacking British forts. He's not even expected to win. He's just expected to annoy the British and get the British to start sending resources out and start fighting him. But much to everybody's surprise, he starts winning battles. He takes a couple forts, Kaskaskia and Cahokia, both Native American words, so we're talking about the Great Plains here. We're talking about the Mississippi River area where mostly Native Americans live. These are British forts. And then, so the British send out an actual army to deal with him, and he beats them at Vincennes, and he actually captures an army. So it's a really small army, but this guy was only supposed to annoy the British, but the British leadership out west is so terrible that they're losing to this small American force that's just smarter and more mobile than them. So the Native American and British force is forced to surrender to this little tiny American force, and this is where we start to see the British start to crumble, because they start getting angry and making mistakes. They start doing really stupid things, and then the British Parliament starts sending over more resources and rethinking the war, because these backwoods redneck American colonialists are starting to win against superior British forces. Then we get help from Spain. So Spain owns New Orleans. New Orleans is down. Let's show you where New Orleans is. Down here. New Orleans is down here. And it's a huge sport for Spain. Anything Spain has in the western part of the United States is either going to the West Coast or coming out through New Orleans. And they've got a pretty powerful guy named Bernardo de Galvez that's running the Spanish port. And he has been secretly helping us. He's been giving us money and ammunition. See, in order to get help from the French, we had to sneak it in on the coastline past the British. But the Spanish own New Orleans, so they can just bring it in openly and sneak it to us. We're going to have to catch this up on the next video. I'll see you in a second.